Anyway, let's talk about the audio layers and just kind of run through the way that they are organized. So, pretty much, so we have all of these mono tracks that say one. That's one because that's the number of tracks. So, two tracks is stereo. Um, one track is audio, mono. Excuse me. So all of that is for the voice acting because we wanted the voices to be centered. You don't have to have your voices on a mono channel. You can definitely like do stereo, like surround sound style, for your voice mixing whenever you mix dialogue. But for this short, I thought it made sense just to keep it all centered. It's always easier to follow that way. And in most short films, like you should have your dialogue centered. There's just times where like if someone's off screen and you hear their voice from like off screen, maybe that could be like mixed slightly differently. Like there's time and a place for stereo dialogue mixing, but usually I avoid that just for the sake of making sure that it's clear and that anyone can hear it. Maybe they only have one earbud in, right? And you still want them to be able to understand the dialogue. I think it's okay to mix and edit with those people in mind, right? And I think you should, right? Because that's how most people are going to hear it. Is like they're going to be watching the short on their phone, right? Maybe with one earbud in, right? So you do have to think about those people. Even if you're like, well, ideally this might be shown like, at least on a good TV with a good set of speakers, maybe in a theater, and I want to mix it so that like if they're in that controlled space, that I know how the experience is going to be, and I can edit around that, right? And it's going to be with great audio and great visuals. So all the black levels of the visuals, it's like I know that like they're not going to they're not going to miss anything because the brightness is low. But like obviously it's like it's hard to plan around that. And it's like I think you should create your art with the knowledge that like it's going to be viewed in a variety of situations. Right? And like I think about this even with the cut, right? Like, are people going to be paying attention to every shot, or is it because if you, I don't know, like I think you should reward people for paying attention, but just like philosophically, right, about filmmaking, I think it's okay to be aware that like, well, what if someone like looks away for just a second to like, sip their drink or something, right? Like, what if, so you should be editing in such a way where like a shot that's important maybe doesn't last for only a second, give people a second or make sure that there's like a second chance to pick up on information, or that there's enough of a chance. You should have to be careful about that stuff. And obviously, it's like I don't want people to compromise their art just for the lowest common denominator or whatever. But I think those are things that you should be aware of whenever you're making a piece. But anyway, so there's all these layers, and most of the dialogue is only a couple of people layered up at a time. This is interesting because there's a news anchor that talks throughout most of this scene, and they're EQ'd so that like it kind of blends into the background. There's what would you call that, a high pass filter. We're cutting off the low end, and so kind of, or no, excuse me, I think this is a low pass filter. I think we're cutting off the high end, so it kind of blends into the background. It may start with a high pass filter. It uses distortion for the high pass filter. Excuse me. Anyway, but just yeah, like the news anchor talks on the TV throughout the whole scene, but that's just blended in the background. So that's one of the few cases where there's like 3 layers potentially at a time, and there's 2 layers. Only one character is really ever talking at once, but there's just a little bit of a tail. Where like I want to make sure that there's enough time for like a character to say their line and finish the breath. Of course, before another character comes in. So that's why there's 2 active layers throughout most of the time. And then there's times where like all the characters say something together. There's a couple of unison lines, so that's why there's a bunch of these dialogue layers, even though they're not all used all the time. There's a couple of instances there where they all say like punctuation pals punctuate all together, and then here I think they all sigh together at the end. They all laugh together. Is there anything in the first scene that's in unison? I think those are all the unison points. And there's a couple of sound effects too that like exist in these mono layers, but mostly it's just reserved for dialogue. And then audio layer 8, of course, is the music. That was really fun to compose, and I'm happy with how it turned out. I think that is all. Yeah, that's all on layer 8 to the very end, and yeah, like I'm happy with that. So that's organized. 9 is ambient sound, which not every scene has. Most of them do, except for scene 3. And I think that's fine. I just wanted to focus on the dialogue here, not have too much distracting noise. You meet Dan Man, so I like that it's quieter, And then so the music comes in, and it's like that's when the ambient noise kind of comes in. It's like saved for the music. I think I tried putting ambient noise, and it just felt like with the music, with the dialogue, it felt too distracting, and I just wanted to focus on what they were saying. Here, and like when the city, I think it's okay to have some ambience, have kind of a lot going on, and it's okay to overwhelm the audience a little bit every now and then, right? It's like they can still hear the dialogue and understand what's going on, but I also wanted this kind of chaotic feeling where there's noise in the background, there's traffic, right, that's passing by, and you feel that. You go into scene two, and they're in a crowded bar, so there's all these kind of people talking in the background, and it's not as distracting, but I want it to feel like a full space. And then scene four, they're outside again, so I want you to hear the traffic, right? I want that to be something people are picking up on. Um, and then anything below that is additional sound effects. And the film is full of sound effects, right? Because there's all of these different like hits and explosions and all these little things where um, like they're fight scenes, right? So there's a bunch of um, different like kind of sound effects, like you know ushering in what am I trying to say? Like accenting the movements and hits of these fights. So it was a lot of fun to like do the sound design. I wanted to like not make it too crazy. I wanted to like just pretty much accent what needed accenting and not overload the audience with just a bunch of different things. When I was editing Star Boys, I felt like I did a lot of sound effects sometimes for scenes that didn't need a bunch of sound effects. You know, um, like whenever the car flew somewhere. Star Boys is a sci-fi miniseries I made, and there's this flying car that flies through space. And I felt like sometimes I just like did a bunch of layers, and so there's whooshes and there's engines, and there's like three whooshes at once. And I don't know, like I don't think it's terrible, but that is something where it's like I wanted to just be a little more utilitarian with sound mixing. I think it is about combining more layers than you expect sometimes, to really make that like sound. Um, but I did kind of feel like that was something where I didn't want a bunch of distracting sound ideas. I wanted it all to be cohesive. Um, and so like I'm fairly happy with the sound overall. And maybe I'll change that philosophy. Maybe I'll realize that no, it is about a bunch of layers. You just have to mix it right. But that's something that just may change over time. But anyway, this is the Punctuation Pals.